Hello, my name is Ken Mossman. I'm a professor of health physics at Arizona State University, and I'm here to interview Dr. William A. Mills, one of the outstanding health physicists in the United States who has worked in the field for well over 50 years. We're here today under the auspices of the Health Physics Society History Committee, and we're in Denver, Colorado at the 45th annual meeting of the Health Physics Society, and today is June 27, year 2000. Bill, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Ken.
It's personally, it's an honor for me to be sitting next to you and interviewing you. I've always held you in the highest regard. I consider you to be a faculty mentor, and many of your accomplishments are things that I have always looked up to. So I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you and talk about the extraordinary career that you've had in health physics. And I hope during the next 45 minutes or so that we can explore many of the things that you've done and share with the radiation protection community, because I think there's lots of things that you've accomplished that are well worth retelling. And I wondered, as a way of starting, tell us a little bit about your early life. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Your family?
Well, I was I was born in 1929. Actually, I was born on Columbus Day, October the 12th. Now, there's a little story with that because I was born at home, and I was born so close to midnight that they really didn't know whether I was born on the 12th or the 13th. So the attending physician said, well, the 12th is Columbus Day, so let's make it October the 12th instead of October the 13th. So actually, I probably am a day younger than what my birthday shows. But I grew up in Lynchburg.
That's in Virginia?
In Lynchburg, Virginia, and I lived there all my boyhood, and I went to college in Lynchburg. I lived at home, and until I got an Aec Fellowship in radiological physics, I lived at home. And I reminiscing on my boyhood, I think I was probably the first of our quote gang, if you will, of boys that went to college. And so that was kind of unique. None of my family had gone. I have an older sister. I had an older brother who served in World War II actually as a deep sea diver, a salvage diver. And I still got his helmet that he brought back when they went to Japan. He couldn't bring American equipment back, but he did bring the Japanese. Both of my, there were 4 children, and both of my parents were worked in a shoe factory, worked very hard, and they kind of set the stage that I often told my parents that I will dig ditches, but I'll be damned if I'll ever work in a shoe factory, because that was hard work. And fortunately, I guess God looked out for me, and I didn't have to go to work in the shoe factory. But I had a most pleasant boyhood. I got accused of a lot of things which I didn't do. I admit we did a few boyish tricks we shouldn't have done, but it was a lot of fun.
Would you like to share any examples?
Well, I'll make it quick. We had a small playground that we could play on, and I guess my father was the first environmentalist I knew, because we lived above the James River, and below us was a paper mill and also a rendering plant for cooking down dead animals, of course. And so we always had black soot all over the place. And one 4th of July, they blew the stacks at the paper mill. And so that's the first time I think I would have characterized the soot as black snow. And my dad worked at a shoe factory, and he contacted the city, and they came out and took samples and analyzed by the state. So I guess in a way, Ken, I've been an environmentalist for many years when the real problem. I have a small story to tell about the rendering plant. I know on one occasion there was a circus passing through and an elephant fell off the truck. And it killed it. It killed it. And so us boys went down by the river there to see this dead elephant. And here's these guys sitting on this elephant eating their lunch. So that always amazed me, that situation. But my boyhood was, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. I had loving parents, and I have a picture here somewhere of me and my mother. And the reason I'd like to show that picture if I could, oh, here she is. You know, my mother died. My mother died about 3 years ago, and she was a very loving woman. And you know, the thing that I will always feel is that I'm convinced that no one will ever love you as much as your mother did. And when she's gone, you know, that's kind of a loss. So she was a dear soul for me, and struggled very much to come up with the money to pay tuition, when it was only $10 an hour. So I had a good boyhood. I'm pleased with it.
Your experiences at Lynchburg College, what did you study there, and how did that lead you into health physics, Bill?
Well, I was determined that I would get as much science and into my education as I could get. And when I graduated from high school, the Kiwanis Club had a $100 scholarship that I could tap into, so I got that. And every year I'd have to go talk to the Kiwanis Club members of the education committee, I guess. Now remember, when I was in school, I started in '47, the hourly semester rate was $10 an hour. And so I took all the chemistry and physics and mathematics I could get out of Lynchburg. And I probably still have the most number of hours completed in 4 years. But I worked most of the time while in a grocery store and that kind of thing. And then I had a paper route, so we made out.
So while you were a student at Lynchburg, you were working in a grocery store and
oh yeah,
and delivering newspapers. So
yeah.
you had a full life.
Yeah, but it was in a way it had its enjoyment, really. I got to meet a lot of people. I learned to deal with people on an honest basis, and I wouldn't have traded it, Ken, for, looking back, I wouldn't have traded my boyhood for anybody's.
Now, when did you meet your lovely wife, Pat?
Well, I was actually I graduated from high school, and when I went to college, I met her while I was in college at Lynchburg, and I was a senior in college when she was a senior in high school. And in my last year of school at Lynchburg, I applied for, Charlie Wright had actually, was the first to go from Lynchburg College into the Aec Radiological Physics Fellowship. And so, but one of my professors was a Dr. Harold Garretson. Harold Garretson was a physical chemist, and he subsequently went to did some work for Y12, the Oak Ridge Y12 plant. And interesting enough, Ken, he's written up in the ORAU history manual as an example of a scientist that can come from a small college and who made a significant contribution to that program. Well, as I say, I took all the chemistry and all the physics and so forth. And when I got ready to graduate, I actually had two fellowships offered to me. And one of them was by the Armor Research Foundation to go to the University of Chicago. And the other one, of course, was the AEC Radiological Physics Fellowship to go to Vanderbilt. And being me, I couldn't see myself living in Chicago.
Big city.
The big city, you know, I wasn't ready for the big time kind of thing. And so Charlie Wright had preceded me, and so I went to, I took the AEC Fellowship at Vanderbilt. And there, of course, is where, you know, I was introduced to the health physics thing, and we had a marvelous class at Vanderbilt. A lot of them are still were in health physics. Ed Alexander, John Oxia, Jerry, from Philadelphia, I forget it, Kaplan, Jerry Kaplan.
Now, this was one of the first classes in health physics at Vanderbilt under the Atomic Energy Commission Fellowship Program?
It was the second AEC Radiological Physics Fellowship per se. Now, Mel Carter, who is a good friend of mine, there was something similar to that prior to that, but this was the second year of the AEC Fellowship Program. The one that Mel was in a year before Charlie Wright, 2 years before me, didn't actually go to school. They already had training, but they were being trained in health physics or environmental radiochemistry. So, and actually, Bern Kahn was in the same class with Charlie Wright.
Now, the faculty in that program is, I suppose, world-renowned. Elda Anderson, Myron Fair, Carl Morgan. Tell us a little bit about your experiences in the Vanderbilt program.
Well, Myron Fair, as you say, Myron Fair, KZ, and Elda Anderson, of course, came to Vanderbilt and lectured. And the second semester before we went to for the 3 months field duty at the lab, and
this is the Oak Ridge Lab.
The Oak Ridge Lab, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and of course, after you know, incidentally, my partner was. We had a lot of veterans from World War II in the class, Bob Baker, but my particular team, they joined us up in teams, to the team, where we would circulate around to different activities within the laboratory. And my partner was a fellow named Joe Bergstein, who had graduated in physics from Washington and Lee. But the interesting thing about Joe, he was a prisoner of war of the Japanese. He was in the Philippines when the Japanese, and so he spent he spent the whole war in Japan and working in an electrical factory. But the interesting thing about it was, after the war ended and they opened the gates, Joe says, "I don't know what this atomic stuff is, but whatever it is, I'm going to be a part of it." And sure enough, he got his master's degree from Vanderbilt on an extension, and went to work at Los Alamos, running one of their big accelerators. So we had a marvelous class. It was a lot of fun.
Any particular memorable experiences during your time at Vanderbilt? Any particular situation that
Well, I
stands
got
out?
married, Ken. You
That's
know,
memorable.
I went after the spring break. At the spring break, I went back to Lynchburg. Pat had spent one semester at college, and she told her mother that she and I were going to get married, and her mother said, "Oh no, you're not." But more recently, my mother-in-law said, "I'm glad she did." I'm glad she did. But the Vanderbilt situation, as I say, that class we had 20 students in the Aec Fellowship, and we became a very close knit group, and we still John Oxia and I, Bob Bacon, I still talk. It was a lot of fun.
Elda Anderson, of course, is memorialized in our society through the Elda Anderson Award, which is given to a young health physicist who shows great promise and leadership in the profession. Is there any particular fond memories you have about Elda Anderson as a teacher that you'd like to share?
Well, when I was given the Elda Anderson Award, I made in my talk, I would cite some of the characteristics of her lecture, and it was always M.E. what, and of course the class say V kind of thing, but I got to know Elda a great deal because when the training, the 3 months we spent running around the facilities at Oak Ridge, both X10, the lab, as well as the gaseous diffusion plant. Many of us applied for extensions to get a master's degree, and I didn't make the cut. But bless her heart, she got me a job working in the health physics division while I could do a thesis under Sam Hurst, noted for the Hurst proportional counter for neutrons, which was I came way ahead of the game, I would say, Ken, because, but she got me, but my first job at the lab was to cut up fish or the White Oak Lake and what have you, and cook them down and do the counting. We did. Have you ever tried to kill a snapping turtle with ether?
No.
Forget it. They just shut themselves down, and you cannot do it. But so I finally had to take and cut its neck off. But that was kind of fun. But one of the interesting things is that we decided, or the aquatic biology, a guy named Krumholtz that I worked for, decided we would try to estimate the population in White Oak Lake, from the Clinch River. And so one Saturday, he decided he was going to put rotenone in the White Oak Lake and poison all the fish, and we're going to count them, and then we're going to cut the organs out. And I was doing the bisecting of organs, and the fish just kept popping up. Man, we were bringing them up, and finally we stopped cutting with a knife, and we were they were popping up fast than we could dissect them. And they just kept on coming, and finally we just started throwing them into the trash. But the interesting thing was that when we put the rotenone, we forgot to close the dam. It had vents in it, and the fish were swimming upstream to get away from the rotenone, and of course they were dying. So he couldn't possibly estimate the population, but it was an interesting experience.
You got your master's degree from the Vanderbilt program in 1954, and what did you do at that time after you graduated from Vanderbilt?
Well, as I say, I did my master's thesis under Sam Hurst, and who developed a proportional counter. And we had, at that time, they were also talking about putting a reactor in an airplane. I'm sure you recall that that was going to be one of the things we do. And they were exposing monkeys for Brooks Air Force Base into the swimming pool reactor at Oak Ridge. And so my master's thesis was to map the dose in this phantom, liquid fuel phantom, under Sam Hurst. But the beauty of my experience with Sam was that during that time is when we started the dosimetry for the Japanese, and that involved Bill Ham, who later I studied under. We were doing the dosimetry trying to reproduce the dose for the Japanese population. An interesting story on that is that we developed the threshold detectors in which we use plutonium based on its straight, flat cross section for neutron energies, and then we used gold and we used sulfur. But one of the isotopes we used, because if you looked at the cross section for fission of neptunium-237, it cuts in about half MeV neutrons. And so Sam talked to Oak Ridge had isolated some 30 milligrams of neptunium-237, and Sam talked to chemistry division they had isolated 60 milligrams of neptunium-237, and so Sam convinced them to let us have 30 milligrams. So we made a foil, or they made a foil for us, and we were using it in the 53 series in Nevada. And Sam had a crew out there already, and and we made this foil, and he said, Bill, I want you to take us out to Nevada, and so we can use it in the shots out there. So Ken, the end of the story is that, as far as I know, I carried half the world's supply of neptunium-237 from Oak Ridge to the Nevada test site. But it was more than that, because they first said, well, we're going to send a courier with you. And Sam didn't like that idea, so he finally said, well, we'll make Bill Mills a courier. What that meant was they were going to put a 45 on me. And my dad wouldn't even let me own a BB gun. And the most conspicuous person on an airplane would have been me, with a prop plane having to get up to go to the toilet with a 45 on me. And so finally, to end the story, the disc was, about 1.25 inches in diameter, flat. And finally, the security people said, we don't care how you get it out there. So I put it in a little glass jar with Kleenex on top and bottom, stuck it in my pocket. So my claim is I flew all the way from Oak Ridge to the Nevada test site with half the world's supply of neptunium-237. So, but those were exciting times.
Now, in 1956, you joined the Public Health Service, and you were with the Bureau of Radiological Health. Is that correct?
Well, it was actually in '55 when I joined the Public Health Service, and again, it was a question of circumstances. Dr. Morgan had, General Hershey had said, look, we're tired of all the scientists and engineers hiding behind their technical know-how. The Korean War was going on, and said, you know, unless you have a child or going to have a child in this, within, or your wife is pregnant, I guess is the best way to say it, we're going to draft you. And Bern Kahn was caught up in that, and I was caught up in, there was another guy from the Health Physics Division, which I don't recall his name at the moment. But anyway, so KZ, Dr. Morgan wrote this letter to my draft board, which was still in Lynchburg, and saying, you know, this fellow's doing some work associated with national defense. A very nice letter. Dr. Morgan was very, very good to me. And so I took it to my draft board, and the lady that was chairman of the draft board said, my brother had to go, so you don't get a deferment. Well, as a consequence of that, we had been doing some studies. Sam and I had been doing some measurements on Godiva assemblies in Los Alamos, and they said, "Oh, we'll put you on the Los Alamos payroll and just send you back here." We were doing the Godiva measurements after some of the accidents of the hemispheres, and so a guy named Payne Harris, who was a physician, and Payne got back to Los Alamos, and they were caught up in the same thing. So it was Bern Kahn and myself, as I say, caught up in that. And so Conrad Straub was in the public health service, and he and I used to ride the bus together. And he said, well, why don't you join the public health service? You can serve 2 years at it. I'll take care of the selective service thing. Sounds good. So, in fact, Bern and I both joined. But the first time I tried to join, I got a letter back from Washington, from the public health service, saying, you know, we got people much better qualified for you, so we're not going to give you a commission. Well, that didn't sit very well with Conrad Straub. You know, he had a little bit of a streak in him, so he called Jim Terrell, which was the other fellow very important to me, and yeah, that's me later on. I didn't have 3 stripes when that picture, when I went into service.
But this is a picture of you while you were in the service.
While I was in the service.
Okay.
And so they said, well, come on in. Jim Terrell, when they turned me down, Jim Terrell stepped into it and said, no, we're going to bring him on. So that's when I joined the public health service, and the time I was flying with the intent that I would go back and work with the public health service at the lab. And
well, it was a long marriage for you, wasn't it? You ended up working there for the majority of your professional career.
Where?
In the public health service.
Oh yeah,
in
20
some capacity.
years. I put in 20 years in the public health service. But when I went to Nevada and I came back, our daughter was born when I was flying out, second child. But anyway, flying back, it turned out that I had actually been transferred to Washington, even though I reported back to Oak Ridge, and Mort Goldman, who some of you might know, said, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Washington. Well, they didn't notify me, and so we had to hurriedly move to Washington. That's when I went to work for Jim Terrell to Saturday, for the 2-year tour. But it was my intent, Ken, to go back to Oak Ridge after I'd finished the 2 years. And but while I was at Oak Ridge, it turned out that I met Bill Ham because he was a consultant to Sam Hearst's group. And so I wanted, they were gonna, I would have been a University of Tennessee graduate too, perhaps.
That's right.
If I'd have gone back, but And Sam wanted me to come back, and Dr. Morgan wanted me to come back, but Jim Terrell said, well, we'll send you to school full time, and that's why, that's how I wound up at the University of Virginia. I had to take a year of physics, but then I went to the medical college and did my thesis.
This was for your doctorate
for the
that
doctorate.
You took in 1964, correct? Right.
And worked for Bill Ham, which was an example of what a Virginia gentleman really is, but none of us achieve it except somebody like Bill Ham. So.
Now, 1970, I think, is in many ways a critical year, not only in your professional career, because you went over to the Environmental Protection Agency at that time, but also in terms of the evolution of nuclear regulations in this country because of the dissolution of the FRC, the Federal Radiation Council, and the assumption by the Environmental Protection Agency for FRC responsibilities. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, how you got to the EPA and EPA responsibilities with respect to radiation standards?
Well, in 1970, when the reorganization plan went into effect, I was, as you say, I was in the Public Health Service. I was head of the Division of Biological Effects, the research division at that time. And the OMB, in fact, a fellow named Chuck Elkins was putting together the organization, and of course all of our environmental stuff, like the Las Vegas laboratory, Dave Harwood, who was doing some of the nuclear engineering and this kind of thing, that was all clearly going to EPA. My division, they had passed the Radiation Control Act based on remember the TV problem of the X-rays being produced by TVs, microwave ovens came into existence, and this kind of thing. So in all their wisdom, they decided to split my division. And Ruckelshaus actually and I went to the Surgeon General, and he wanted to have all those, that whole program, whole division. He says this will be the nucleus of EPA's biological research program in looking at environmental problems. The Surgeon General wouldn't agree to that. And so it was written, my division was written up in science as a pinnacle of negotiated absurdity. The words which I loved, of course. But we actually did. We split John Vilforth, the director of the Bureau at the time. He and I sat down, and after consulting with the staff, likelihood my program would move to Carolina to be this initiative for the Environmental Health Laboratory. And but at the same time, the old Federal Radiation Council staff was transferred to EPA, and that all became part of the division of criterion standards within the radiation program. So it was, and I, had to make a decision which way I'd go, and I went to EPA, and subsequently became head of that program in EPA for a while.
As you look back on your EPA experiences, were there any particular highlights of your tenure at the Environmental Protection Agency?
Well, in retrospect, I guess I would say that it was a good experience. Especially under Ruckelshaus, he had a pretty good feel for what was important, and he gave the program support. But as long as he felt that the old AEC was pretty well handling its issues. He couldn't see getting into a fight with the Atomic Energy Commission. But subsequently, some of the administrators kind of changed that, and they were less compassion, if you will, to to the Atomic Energy Commission. So you had this somewhat change in philosophy of what the agency is going to be all about in the future. But it was, I had the opportunity to be head of the radiation program in EPA several times, and I chose not to head the program, but instead to continue to write standards for the program. I thought that's where the most important contribution I could make to the effort.
Now, during your time at EPA, were you not involved in some of the early thinking that has resulted in the EPA using the 4 picocurie per liter action level that is now used to help control, I don't want to use the word regulate, but control indoor radon levels? Would you like to tell us a little bit about the background that resulted in the 4 picocurie per liter action level?
Well, there were several situations like that. For example, before EPA was formed, you know, when the number 4 comes up, it sounds like it's some magic number because it's 4 millirems a year for the Safe Drinking Water Act, 4 picocuries per liter. So, but there's nothing magic in those numbers. But the 4 picocuries per liter of radon really arose out of the effort or the finding that some of the tailings in Grand Junction had been used as backfill for home construction. And so the state of Colorado had found some radon levels that they wanted investigated. And before EPA was formed, a group of us, Vic Archer, and for example, who was well known for his radon studies, lung cancer. We met in Las Vegas and kind of drafted what would be a reasonable number for applicable to the homes in terms of defining that tailings had in fact been used in the construction as backfill or in the mortar or what have you. And so we set that number for the cleanup, which was later applied to the Florida phosphate situation when that was discovered to have result in radon in houses. But the more disturbing number 4, if you will, is the 4 millirems a year that we wrote for the drinking water standard, which, as you well know, Ken, has become quite controversial because it's being applied to the Yucca Mountain repository, and that's, in many ways, that's a total misuse of the number as we had originally developed it, which was in a time of we weren't doing atmosphere. The U.S. wasn't doing atmospheric testing, but the Chinese were still, and we had looked at the Great Lakes and kind of thing, and gave us a much lenient application, the number. But it was even today it bothers me that that number is being used in a way that there's no way we could have predicted at that time that it would be used to essentially apply to Yucca Mountain, for example.
Now, in 1981, you left the Environmental Protection Agency and went to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Now, what did you do at the NRC?
Well, I was head of the biological bioeffects program, research program, and there, but and managed some of the research that the NRC was doing. But we also, with my colleagues like Diane Flack, we started working on the revision of 10 CFR Part 20, which was a major regulation for occupational exposures in the nuclear industry. So, and then we did sponsor some research, but it wasn't a very big part of our effort. Most of it was devoted to, and of course I left the NRC before it was finalized, but basically we had laid it out at that time.
I think it was at the very beginning of your tenure at the NRC that I had the privilege of first working with you when I took a sabbatical leave at NIH from Georgetown University. You had just moved, I think, to the NRC. I suppose your next move to the Committee on Interagency Radiation Research and Policy Coordination, sometime referred to as CHRPC, offered perhaps some of the greatest professional challenges that you had. You were the senior technical advisor there and were responsible for developing many of the technical programs in an interagency forum. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was a very satisfying activity, and it was in many ways kind of a follow-up to attempts made several times to establish such a committee as that. But CHRPC, you know, lasted 10 years, and when you look at it, it's about the same length of time that the old Federal Radiation Council lasted, and I think we did some good things. We did get the agencies talk together. We did address the question of neutron quality factor. We did look at the probability of causation, the application of that, which is certainly current because that's a big issue these days, is compensation for workers. And in our case, we applied the NIH probability of causation tables, as you know, to the VA, the veterans. And I think that was a worthwhile effort. And I think in the current situation, as far as DOE is concerned, I would much prefer that be the basis for compensation rather than the presumption of causation. That is, that if we don't have a good dose record that we can apply, we will presume it may have been caused by the radiation, the cancer that was there. So, but the CHRPC thing was an opportunity to pull the agencies together. They were all very interested in pursuing it, and I was fortunate in having you come spend some time with me, and that was an asset for us as well. So it was, but as I say, it lasted 10 years, and attempts have been made to reestablish something like that, but it doesn't seem to have taken over very well. So, but it's still needed in some fashion.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed my opportunity to spend a second sabbatical in CHRPC under your guidance and good counsel, and I was disappointed, like a lot of people were, that CHRPC went under. If we were to have another CHRPC or another interagency group, what would you do to make it more successful? How is it that we could ensure its success? What is it that the CHRPC situation did or was built in that ultimately caused it to fail?
Well, I wouldn't say it failed. I would say it was disestablished.
Disestablished, okay.
It was, there wasn't, you know, I think it would have continued to work had the administration been a little bit more perceptive in terms of some of the issues that we're going to be faced with. And a good example of that, Ken, is the situation now with the Yucca Mountain situation, in which, as you well know, they applying the drinking water standards that we had written for community water supplies that applied at the tap, and that had to serve a certain size population, 25 people or 15 connections, to apply that to Yucca Mountain when that repository is going to be deep underground, several thousand feet, and then require it to not result in any kind of water contamination for 10,000 years seems to me to be a far stretch. And you kind of, I guess what bothers me most about that is they picked up a number rather than going through the process of trying to develop a safe standard that is protective of health. And I don't think that issue is over. My feeling is that Congress is going to move on that issue because I was at a hearing, listening to a hearing last week, and it's obviously there's EPA's taking some hits over applying that number, the Safe Drinking Water Act numbers, to Yucca Mountain. So I'm optimistic that that will eventually resolve itself. As you probably know, the GAO has looked at that thing.
The General Accounting Office.
The General Accounting Office, I'm sorry, and for Senator Domenici, and hopefully they will have a report out fairly soon to lay that out. So we haven't lost the battle totally yet. So.
Now, with the disestablishment, as you word it, of Chirpiq in 1995, you then retired, but you've remained quite active in legislative matters, particularly on behalf of the Health Physics Society. Are there legislations, you've alluded to some already, that you see are very important on the horizon that you'd like to see enacted?
Well, I would definitely. The one thing that I think needs to be, that I've been in talking to the legislative staffs, and I expect I'll have to be talking from last week. I expect I will have to be talking to some of the congressmen themselves, convincing them of the one thing that I feel real strong about is that look at this whole process of writing legislation. When you do that, think down the road of the culture that's in the agency you're going to give the responsibility to write standards and enforce those standards. Not enough of that is done. The NRC has a culture, the EPA has its culture, and so at least those two agencies, if they're, have similar interests, you need to look at that situation and make sure that you look down the road as to what type of standards would you expect to come out of an agency that's going to impact. And I feel that we're making some inroads on that. That the response I got last week seemed to appear that, yeah, they're really willing to listen to that and want to hear more about it. So I expect when I get back, I'll have a few telephone calls to address that issue.
In looking back at your 50 years of remarkable accomplishments in health physics, what do you consider to be your greatest accomplishments personally, and what accomplishments would you say have provided you with the greatest level of satisfaction? It's probably a difficult question for a guy like you because there's so many things that you've done, but if you could pick out one or two.
Well, I don't know that I've accomplished a lot. When I look back on it, I've been involved in some major activities, and I think I've influenced them somewhat. but when I look at what have I really accomplished in it, I hope the thing that I have accomplished is at least when in those issues that are going to impact on the public, that I have kept my public health hat on and made that first. I think I can truthfully say that I have not been a tool, if you will, of the nuclear industry. Public health is still the most important thing to me. But at the same time, I feel that the nuclear has taken a lot of hits that have not been in public's benefit. And so it's been this constant battle within within myself is how you take this balance in mind. But when I look back at it, I'm pretty well satisfied that I've been honest. I've been tried to be honest, above board. Oftentimes a little bit too argumentative, as you well know, but nevertheless, it's.
They're good arguments.
Nevertheless, this profession and the people I've gotten to know has just been fantastic. So I have no real regrets of my choice of. I don't think I'd have made a good gas technologist, and so the choice to go into this rad business and the people who have influenced my life so much, with KZ, Sam Hurst, Eld Anderson, and then Bill Ham, and Jim Turrell, and the guy, the vet that I work for in public health, Art Wolf. These people have had a tremendous impact, and I must say, in all honesty, and I don't mean to be over with these gratitude, but I must say, Ken, I've loved arguing with you a great deal.
Yeah. No, I also have enjoyed the arguments as well, because we listen to each other. I mean, we may have different viewpoints about certain issues, but we listen to each other and we respect each other, and I think that's really very, very important. As you look over your 50-year career, how's health physics changed? And I know it's changed in many, many ways, but are there particular things that have happened in the profession of health physics that really stand out that you'd like to share?
Well, I guess I never encouraged in my children to go into health physics.
Why is that?
And because in my own view, was in that period when the field was very, very exciting. We were breaking new ground. For example, and I'm not advocating testing again, but there was a certain satisfaction in going out in Nevada and monitoring and living with the people around the test site. You know, the Public Health Service brought people in from the states, and if you look at the training we gave those people in radiation protection, they went back and established state programs in rad health. You can almost identify every state program was started by somebody that we brought into the Public Health Service specifically to do monitoring while we were doing the atmospheric testing. And the training I did for some of these people, taking them out in the field, and I won't go into a lot of that, but some of them came out totally scared of radiation, and I think we helped cement their view, cement their belief, and so if I had one particular accomplishment, I think, and it wasn't just me, it was people like Mel Carter Mel in particular, we had a great influence on, if you look across the board, we had a great influence on the whole radiation safety program in the U.S. And a lot of that credit is due to Jim Turrell's foresight.
Sure, of course. Well, let me just close the interview by asking you very simply, what would you like to be remembered for in health physics?
Oh, I guess that I, as argumentative as I've been, I hope it's understood that I built, that most of it was due with a sincere belief that the benefits of radiation are very large. And I'd just like to be remembered the fact that I tried to, do the protection, but not lose sight of the fact that it's, in my view, is a benefit to the American citizen to have nuclear in both medicine and industry, and it impacts across the whole realm of government. And so, if I've played any part in giving that kind of assurance that the public, you benefited for our effort in this regard, then I'm satisfied.
Well, thanks, Bill, for being with us. And I must say, in my view, you've had a remarkable career. You've had a remarkable impact on the profession of health physics. And I've enjoyed this opportunity to just sit with you and discuss your career and what you've done. And thanks very much for being here with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Ken. Thank you very much.
Bill, you brought some interesting pictures with you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about them. One here I'm holding says Ash Meadows, Parrump. Do you want to tell us a little bit about where this picture was taken and what it signifies?
Well, that's the fellow, I'm with the survey meter, and that's one of the old gamma ray survey meters we used to monitor the off-site areas where we had people stationed. But several of us operated out of the test site itself, and every time a shot was ready to go, many of us would go out in the field to essentially track where the fallout's going to occur. And here I'm training, actually he was an executive administrator, so we trained a lot of state people, but you can see that the test site is over to your left hand towards that way. And so it was part of the monitoring and training program. As I say, we trained a lot of state people and went back set up the station. So that's what we did. Any
significance to Ash Meadows?
Well, it was significant to the people that worked, the men that worked on the test site. May I just leave it at that?
You certainly may, and we'll let the viewer imagine what that might be. Thank you. The next picture I have is one in which you are being awarded the Elda Anderson Award. Yeah. And I think this was in 1969. You were one of the earliest recipients of this award. And tell us a little bit about this. I believe it was given to you in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it was in Pittsburgh, and my wife and actually my mom and dad were attending that. And that was a picture taken by Charlie Wright, who has taken an awful lot of pictures of things. It was given to me by Walt Snyder, and Neil Standard played a big role in me getting that. And one of his comments was the only regret was that I wasn't a student of Rochester.
The next picture is with someone who I think we both hold in the highest regard. If I'm not mistaken, this picture was taken in 1992 at Georgetown University during the summer school, Health Physics Society summer school that you and I had put on, and it's a picture of you and Warren Brooks, a columnist who worked for the I believe it was the Detroit News.
Detroit News.
And he was, tell us a little bit about Warren and what he wrote about.
He was interested in the truth of what the whole radiation issue was all about, and he was a columnist that published a lot in the Washington Times as one of his outlets, and I met him through him calling me on the radon issue actually, and he and I struck up a friendship, and of course you became quite acquainted with it. He died suddenly. He was writing a column. He died maybe 6-8 months after this picture was taken, and it was, in fact, there's now a newspaper award given in Warren's name. It was a pretty, I felt a very crushing blow for the news reporting of radon, of issues involved radiation, particularly the radon issue. And,
Warren was one of the few journalists that I recall who really understood the economic impact of regulatory compliance and the need to look at regulatory impact in deciding what regulations are appropriate.
Well, as I say, Steve, Ken, there's an award given every year called the Warren Brooks Award because he was held in such high esteem by his colleagues in the news reporting. So he wasn't partisan in any sense of the word. So he's greatly missed.
Now, this last picture that I have is a group photograph of, I believe, the executive committee of the International Radiation Protection Association. And you are currently a member of that committee. You represent the Health Physics Society, as well as I believe Frank Massey is in this.
Frank Massey is here, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Tell us a little about where this picture was taken and the circumstances.
This was taken at a meeting we held, year before last, I guess. We had a meeting in the Washington area of the Executive Council. And as you can see, I'm the guy without the tie on. It was about a year ago here in Washington. It's the Executive Council, and Ken Case is of course in there somewhere.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.